Hello to everyone on this conference. I'm Patrick Rouvillois, the head of the Tech Hub of Natixis CIB, and it's with a great pleasure that I welcome you to this Explore Tech Forum that will be focusing on new technology and energy, in particular looking at next generation nuclear technologies. So I will pass the floor to Eric Benoist, who will be hosting the conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to you all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Benoist, and I'm a tech and data research specialist working for Natixis in London. And it's my pleasure today to host yet another very interesting roundtable on the fascinating topic of advanced nuclear technology. So, after more than 20 years of dithering, nuclear is finally back in the spotlight. And to some extent, this is the result of extreme geopolitical tensions arising from the Russian crisis and the more fragile access to the country's gas resources, at least for Europe and its main partners. But above all, nuclear power is finally being recognized as the very low carbon energy source that it is in the context of national energy transition programs. The figures from ADEME showed here on screen and quoted, I believe, by our speaker, Daniel Verwaerde, during his audition at the French National Assembly in December last year, speak for themselves. To produce 1 kilowatt of nuclear electricity, it generates 6 grams of CO2 only, which compares to 1,000 grams for coal, 700 grams for oil, 400 grams for gas, but also 43 grams for solar, 14 grams for wind, 6 grams for hydro. So, by the way, these figures have been produced using an ISO certified method, life cycle method by an independent agency, in case you were wondering. And so, on the face of it, nuclear power seems to be very compatible with the idea of fighting climate change. But to be clear, it's not our intention today to entertain the passionate debate between proponents of a full-on nuclear energy mix versus those of a complex complete renewable landscape. In our view, the world is going to need both types of energy. And indeed, in its recent net zero 2050 scenario, the International Energy Agency makes the following predictions. The share of renewables in total electricity generation will increase to 88% by 2050. In the meantime, nuclear power will also double its capacity to contribute 8% of the total in fine, which implies steady growth at a rate 5 times that of the past decade. So in one form or another, the future is therefore increasingly looking nuclear. Yet, many questions remain. As of last year, 52% of the 437 nuclear reactors in operation in the world were aged 35 years or older, all second-generation reactors with an initial lifespan of 40 years. These production units definitely require our immediate attention. Fortunately, when looking at the number of recent construction starts in the world, it reveals that the world is probably already quite late on the road to nuclear renaissance. And as a result, extension programs are now being rolled out, and reactors are being authorized to operate on a case-by-case basis for an extra 10 to 20 years, sometimes up to 40 years in the US, after refurbishment, of course, and retrofitting of additional safety equipment. This strategy is designed to buy us time whilst the next generation of nuclear reactors is being deployed. But what exactly are we talking about when we speak of next generation nuclear reactors? What characteristics should the nuclear power plants of tomorrow have? The decisions we make today will most likely impact the nuclear landscape over the next 50 to 80 years. And the risk, in my opinion, is simply to go for more of the same, perhaps with some additional enhanced safety systems to appease populations still scarred by the ghosts of Chernobyl. Unfortunately, this won't be enough, and next generation nuclear technologies must also address the weaknesses of their predecessors in the domains of efficiency, grid flexibility, and of course, radiotoxic waste management. And finally, they must evidently become more competitive or risk facing a slow decline. To help us navigate this complexity and understand the challenges but also the opportunities ahead of us, I'm joined today by two excellent guests. First, Daniel Verwaerde, who was General Administrator of the French Atomic Energy Commission between 2015 and 2018. In this position, he advised the French government on both civilian and military nuclear topics and was involved in all major projects for the French nuclear industry, including the fourth generation reactor Astrid, nuclear fusion tokamak ITER, and the Jules Horowitz reactor. Then we're pleased to welcome as well Jay Brister, Chief Business Development Officer at General Fusion, one of the fastest growing private companies in the world of nuclear fusion today. Jay's been around for more than 40 years in various leading roles at US utilities firms and has had considerable exposure to small modular reactors and advanced nuclear technologies throughout his formidable career. So to start this conversation, I would like perhaps to go back to the strategies that are currently being adopted by a number of countries, including France, to secure the future of their nuclear electricity production. And maybe I want to ask this question to you, Daniel. Countries such as France and the US are currently betting quite aggressively on third generation reactors such as the French EPR or the American AP1000 to replace their aging equipment. However, many criticisms, as you know, are being leveled at the pharaonic nature of these projects, their complexity, and the numerous financial risks associated with their deployment. During his audition at the French National Assembly on the 13th of December, I believe Henry Proglio, former CEO of EDF, described the EPR, for instance, as being too complex and almost unbuildable. Other more technological criticisms are also being made, denouncing the unsatisfactory nature of pressurized water technologies in terms of efficiency, in terms of their capacity to satisfy high industrial heat applications such as hydrogen production, which is a hot topic, as you know, and above all, their inability to fully, truly reduce the volumes of problematic radiotoxic waste throughout their life cycle. So, Daniel, are we actually going the wrong way with third generation reactors? And given the costs involved, can we actually really afford to keep going in that direction?
Okay. Thank you, Eric. So my name is Daniel Verwaerde. As you mentioned it, I was the former General Administrator, CEO, in fact, of the French Atomic Energy Commission. Perhaps I can start to try to answer your question, which is a complex question, to say a few words about the French energy policy, which is probably what I say is true for many countries. This policy is pursuing two goals. The first is to try to reduce the dependency to carbon energy, you mentioned it, but the second, you said just a few words about it, is the energy sufficiency. For each country, it's very important to have these two goals in mind. And of course, wind and sun energy can't be driven and they produce when it is windy or sunny. So it could induce a very important risk, what we call the blackout risk. To mitigate that risk, these two energy need a backup, which produce when one needs to consume it. Possible solutions to this backup is, of course, electricity storage or oil, gas, coal plants, but all of them are carbon energies. And what about storage? The only reasonable solution is hydraulics. Other solutions are very far on the future, and today we can't rely on it. So only hydro is the right thing for storage. And if we look at France, but I think it's true for many countries, the exception is probably in Northern Europe, every possible site for hydro has been already constructed. And so for France, for many countries, nuclear energy is the sole energy which is compliant with these two goals, I recall them. And so please understand when I'm speaking about nuclear, you have to understand it in a very general manner. It means fusion or fission. Both of them, for me, are part of nuclear. In France, as you know it, the nuclear reactors are aging, and the very question is how can we replace them? As you know, French electricity consumption is currently 500 terawatt-hour, and it should increase it should scale to 600 or 700 terawatt-hour within 10 or 15 years. But French regulation doesn't permit to create new nuclear sites, and so France has to use the grid, and his only solution is to replace the old reactors by new one. And the very question, what kind of new ones? And in the French policy, you have one alternative, which means it could be big reactors, EPR, but it could be also small modular reactors, pressurized water reactors, of course. And your question, and if we develop the third generation reactors, are we on the wrong way? At a first glance, my feeling is that it's a bad choice, not because you have many choices, but because you have only one available solution. If you consider the French situation, it's almost too late to start building new reactors. We should have been decided earlier. And so constructing a new fleet of reactors is a huge investment. We will speak about it, of course, during this conference. And this investment is committing France for 60, 70, 80 years. So one must choose a technology which is proven. And I am sorry to say that there is no available proven technology, and that the third generation shows the higher technology readiness level. Third generation is in fact the second generation pressurized water reactors, which is implementing additional tips, additional equipment to enhance safety. Economically speaking, they are in fact less efficient than the current second generation fleet. Third generation should be beneficial of technology enhancements, especially digital technology like supercomputing simulation, 3D printing, or artificial intelligence. It should also take benefit of new project management method. But this is a big but. Nuclear world is a very conservative world, and my opinion is that nuclear world doesn't take benefits of these enhancements. It just designs the new reactor as usual. It's business as usual, and it turned out that these designs are too sophisticated, partly because of safety, but also because during 20 years, there is no real new project, and the staff lost the competency. You, Eric, you are quoting Henrique Proglio, the former CEO of EDF, who was explaining that the EPR, the evolutionary pressurized reactor, was too complex and almost impossible to be constructed. Frankly speaking, I am a little bit disappointed by reading that, and because as the CEO of EDF, even if he's right, he was in the right position to change it. So I'm surprised that he let the things going on. But frankly speaking, I am not so pessimistic as Henrique Proglio, probably because he's a financial expert, and whilst I am an engineer and a project manager who was in charge of large nuclear projects in France. My analysis is that the EPR in Flamanville is a first of the kind, and I know that lessons were learned from it. So I presume that next CPRs that will be launched, I think in Hinkley Point, this reactor will be more breathable because we learned the lesson. And when President Macron announced in Belfort in February 2022 the construction of 6 EPR2, they are evolving a new design, of course introducing the lesson learned. I know, and you mentioned some critics about this technology. because this technology is delivering a low yield of electricity, and you know probably the yield is only 1/3 of the produced heat, because of course there are some physical laws, we call it in French the Carnot law, to be precise, which says that the ratio is depending on the temperature, and it can only be 1/3 of the heat which is used to produce electricity. Of course, we could think to better yields, but it should involve higher temperatures, and no one knows whether reactor materials should resist this high temperature on long time, which means 40, 50, 60 years. Of course, 2/3 of the heat is lost, and of course we can think we could reuse steam with the steam which is lost. Russian people, for instance, are heating many apartments in towns. In France, EDF and the French government doesn't want to take such a risk, because when you are heating apartments, civilian apartments, with heat coming from a nuclear reactor, one time you could have a nuclear contamination of the heat, and of course you could contamine the whole town. And of course there is a second reason, which is an engineer, technical reason, that when you deliver heat from a reactor, the heat has to be carried for a very long distance, kilometers, and in fact you have a lot of heat leakage during the carrying, and so it's not necessarily a good yield at the end of the day. You pointed out the nuclear waste which are generated by this pressurized water reactor. You are right. If you practice what we call the open cycles, which means that you use one time the fuel and then you put it in the deposit, of course we are going. These reactors are with no recycling, are generating a big amount of waste, and it means a large amount of fuel which is being lost. Moreover, some of this waste are very radioactive, a very long life radionuclides, as plutonium, americium, curium. And recycling is of course a better solution. Single cycle is possible in a PWR, but multi-recycled implies to use reactor of 4th generations, which are evolving fast Newton. That will be perhaps the next part of our discussion. Yes. As I mentioned it, the 3rd generation pressurized reactors that states are wishing to build are very large facility involving rather complex design associated to a very important building cost. But this gigantism, if I say, and this complexity implies a large amount of time also to build them, which increase the initial cost, what we call the overnight cost. And time is money. When the time of duration of building in Flamanville, for instance, scales from 6 years to 12 or 15 years, the total cost increased by a factor of 2 or more. So my feeling is that gigantism means also that finance is probably the most important concern regarding nuclear investments. Greens and European nuclear opponents have very well understood that. Let's recall the recent debates in Brussels about the perimeter definition of green energies. 3rd generation, of course, but also every kind of nuclear technology are requesting capex, huge capex. Compared to gas, for instance, the cost of nuclear produced electricity with nuclear is 90% of the induced by the initial investment. With gas, you know, it's probably less than 30%, which means that nuclear electricity prices are very stable, not to say robust to every geopolitical simulation. At the opposite, gas electricity prices are very connected to gas prices and then are very relying on the geopolitical solution. As a conclusion, a very brief conclusion, I would say that 3rd generation pressurized water reactors are far to be optimal, especially when you speak about EPR AP1000 or Russian VVER. They remain complex to build, to operate, and to maintain, suboptimal regarding the electricity yield, and they generate long-life waste if you do not recycle them. Because of the nuclear industry status, they are the only available reactors implementing today, currently, a high technology readiness level. And to be able to generate a more suitable solution, nuclear industry should modify its global philosophy by introducing more innovative process and by taking into account the different enhancement provided by digital technology and project management. Okay, so it was perhaps a little bit too long, but that was probably my feeling about third generation.
No, thank you very much for that long explanation, and it brings us basically to my next question on the alternatives to potential alternatives to Gen 3. Many, you know, a lot of money has already been spent actually on R&D projects over several decades to develop things like fast neutron reactors, molten salt reactors, which are part of what you did call the so-called fourth generation of nuclear systems. And in some cases, large-scale demonstrators have been built. I mean, Super Phoenix in France is probably the best example, the most impressive example. Unfortunately, these experiments so far have not been extremely positive and have proven financially costly. This did not lead either to any commercial or satisfactory commercial production, excluding perhaps the two Russian prototypes, I think called BN600 and BN800, which I believe are still in operation. So, Daniel, does it actually make sense to continue working on this fourth generation technology? And if so, why? Could you maybe explain to our audience quickly, you know, what the benefits are of these technologies versus the previous one, for example?
Okay, thank you, Frank-Henri. If I answer in one word, the answer is yes. Of course, as probably you know, I supported strongly this kind of program when I was at the head of CIB. Perhaps there is the main reason, the main explication is a little bit technical. Perhaps I can try to explain it. If you look at the second goal I mentioned previously, the second goal is to try to have some electricity autonomy. In fact, you have, and you use nuclear, of course, you have to remember that Earth could provide roughly natural uranium to humankind for 1 century, not more. And if you look at the natural uranium mixed, when you go to the mine, this mix is composed by two isotopes, uranium-235, and the proportion is very low, less than 1%, 0.7% to be precise. And of course, the second isotope is uranium-238, which is present at the percentage of 99.3, so more than 99%. But pressurized water reactors are consuming a specific mix, and in fact they are just consuming the uranium-245, which is less than, I recall it, 1%. And so with this third generation of reactors, you are just losing 99% or more of the natural uranium. And of course, if we could use this 99%, the resource that could provide in electricity for mankind would be electricity for 5 or 10,000 of years. Do you hear me? Fine to say thousands of years. So that's really the graal, I would say. And fourth generation fast neutron reactors are Super Phoenix in France, or BN600 or 800 in Russia, or the Indian, Japanese, or the previous past US breeders can burn this 99% of unused uranium because they are involving fast neutrons. Fast neutrons are able to transmute uranium into plutonium, and in fact, the very fuel for this fourth generation is plutonium. Indian engineers, we have to mention, because it's also interesting for long term, Indian engineers are also considering fast neutron reactor that could burn thorium. Fast neutron can in fact transmute thorium into a specific uranium-233, which could be the very fuel for this fourth generation reactor. So we hope to get, I would say, the 10,000 of free electricity is to use either uranium-238 or thorium. As you understand, these fourth generation reactors are suitable to produce energy on long time, and this is why it's very important to keep working on this technology. Additionally, they have four qualities, I would say. The first one is because they have higher temperatures compared to third generation. They are higher temperature in the cooling liquid, they can provide a better electricity yield. This is the first quality. The second is, of course, we could reuse the steam which is produced for industrial application. But the concern is the same as for third generation. The third quality is that they can burn the uranium, actinized as curium, americium, neptunium, that I said to be very dangerous and to be very long-lived radionuclides. And so they are produced by the pressurized water reactors, so second and third generation. This fourth generation could burn it. And last but not least, of course, because they burn all the waste, they can drastically decrease the nuclear waste inventories. And of course, it's a good opportunity for our children. The current question that you ask is why? See, they are so magic. Why do these fast reactor experiments, even at scale 1, are considered as failures? As the former manager of CEA, I would say that I'm personally not convinced that they are failures. I think the only question should be, why are they not currently deployed today? And I think 4 factors can explain that. The first is the economic factors. Frankly speaking, they produce today, currently, the electricity at a cost that range between 50 and 100% more expensive than second generation water reactor, which means that the cost for a megawatt hour would range between 100 and 150 US dollars. Such a comparison has to be revised today because third generation, the cost of production for third generation will be in this range, so about 100 to 130 US dollars per megawatt hour. And of course, if you look at the spot price for electricity in Europe this last year, you see that of course it can range from 0 to more than $1,000. So I think today, and that was probably not true 3 or 4 years before, today they are coming back and are very economic. The second reason is the industrial factor. The lack of natural uranium, I said it before, could occur within 1 century. This is a too long period to be considered by electricity industry. They see at the range of 10 or 20 years, not more. And I think the current conflicts between Russia and Ukraine shows that European states, that their access to energy sources could be denied, and so that they could be deprived to natural uranium. And so the amount of depleted uranium, which is a byproduct of enrichment, currently located in Europe, and especially in France, is the right backup and a good solution to use fourth generation fast reactor. The third factor is the proliferation factor. Fast reactors, fourth generation fast reactors, are burning plutonium, which are considered proliferant, especially in the USA, because they associated the fuel cycle the cycle is dealing with separate plutonium. Of course, plutonium is a beta fissile material to produce optimized atomic weapons. But remember that before Little Boy, which was involving plutonium, the fissile material of Fatman was uranium, which proved that uranium is as proliferant as plutonium. So I think that the international control regime led by the International Atomic Energy Agency could be efficient to control both fissile material, and so there is no reason to say that plutonium is more proliferant. The last, but perhaps not the least factor, is the political factor. Opponents to nuclear are strongly fighting against these fourth generation reactors, because if they were deployed, that would mean that mankind is relying for hundreds of centuries on nuclear. And of course, it's not that they wish. And so that's why there is so a big political fighting against this fourth generation. My believing, to conclude, is that for long term, fast neutron reactors should be, with fusion, part of the solution in the energy equation. Other contributors, such as wind or solar, can't be driven and need carbon energy backups or that large electricity storage system to be constructed. They can only be considered as a part of energy solution if one adds a suppletive means such as gas, oil, or coal. And so nuclear is probably the best solution, and the fourth generation is the best solution. Thank you for listening to me.
So maybe I have a question for Jay at this point. Countries like China, for example, are making a lot of progress on demonstrators in the fourth generation, like the CFR 600 demonstrator or the SMR project, which is a molten salt project. Jay, you're a businessman, you've been advising a lot of people around the world in the industry. Would you say that traditional nuclear powers such as France or the US or Canada are now falling behind their competitors in the emerging countries such as China? Do you see this as a threat in terms of their ability to commercialize their technologies beyond their border?
No, I think there's a kind of a confluence of events going on today, and it really goes to what you have on the bottom of this slide, and that's 20 years on. The question is why, and I really think that we're closer today than we ever have been to seeing some of these new technologies come to market. On the light water side of things, on the small modular reactor front, I think we're seeing probably now more so than ever the emerging commercial acceptance of the technologies, because when you take a new technology and you try and get it into the market, when you go out to the market will typically ask you three things. Is this thing licensed by your nuclear regulator in your country? Have you built one in your country? And then have you built one on schedule and on budget in your country? So just some three fundamentals there, because at the end of the day, you're going to need to de-risk these projects as we go forward, such that financing can come in and support the delivery of these. So as we look at these next generation of technologies coming to the market, you're looking at technologies, as you see on your list here, none of these are light water reactors. So there'll need to be a regulatory construct that's going to support that. So you're going to have that de-risk as you go forward to eliminate regulatory uncertainty, such that a commercial transaction can be put together. So I think the push to move forward in this space is going to be driven by the needs of countries, as stated earlier, with a policy needing to decarbonize their electricity sector. What is my cleanest near-term path? And then for longevity, what comes in behind that to support that? And I think as these technologies evolve over the next few years, and again, the other dynamic here is government support for some of these programs as well. So I think we're seeing, just due to the geopolitics at the moment, governments beginning to weigh in a bigger way in the advancements of these technologies and funding the development of these technologies in the Western world. So it'll be interesting to see how that direct support and actually public-private partnerships to move technologies forward also comes into the equation, Eric.
Right. And so maybe I want to say a few words now about small modular reactors. Many experts are suggesting that if large nuclear reactors projects are too costly or too risky to execute, making it very difficult for new types of investors to join the negotiation table and commit capital, over the long term, then the solution lies perhaps in smaller modular reactors, i.e. reactors with an electrical output of between 10 and 300 megawatts, making intensive use of factory construction and advanced manufacturing methods for higher quality results. So Jay, I know you've done a lot of work on SMRs, and I know that in Canada in particular, SMRs are a big part of government plans. It made a lot of noise around the concept. So what do you make of the SMR story so far, and can this concept actually become really part of the nuclear picture? And what is, according to you, their market potential, and what are maybe the challenges to their adoption?
I mean, I think the sector itself is making great advancements. It is, as you mentioned, it's a long journey to get to the point where the technology is ready to come to the market. But I think we're seeing that today in this sector. You've got, as you shown here, NuScale is a company based out of the United States. It has advanced to the point that it's actually gone public, publicly traded company. You've got a couple of others in the States that are beginning to move forward with their technology, and then some advancements on technology in the UK with things coming to market there. But I think in Canada, what the interesting thing is, in Canada, there's been a very long effort in Canada to advance the technologies there, and I think what we're seeing in Ontario with the recent announcement of a GE technology coming to the market there, and the support of the provincial utility there, OPG, to advance that. OPG is also tied in with X Energy as well for another application for this particular technology in Ontario. So, and I think kind of the world is watching what is going to be going on in Ontario as these projects are getting the financial support they need, and then stepping into, I think just within the last couple of weeks, a consortium signed a contract to actually go forward and start the delivery of the first SMR there in Ontario. So I think the proof will be in the pudding, in that if these technologies do get built, on schedule and on budget to support, at the end of the day, an economic electricity price coming out of these, they'll be able to compete in the market. Right.
And so maybe Daniel, we should say a few words about Verwaerde in France. I know the CEA has been part of a consortium to develop a French SMR technology. Can you very briefly give us an idea of what the strategy is about, and what the ambitions are in France for this SMR technology?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So yes, you as President Macron announced this 6 EPR, he also said that there is a small amount of money to develop SMR. And so there are the Verwaerde project, and there are what I call AMR for advanced modular reactor, and you have two financements for these two kinds of SMR. So Verwaerde is the one SMR which is in France, which is a small pressurized water reactors, which is intended to be complementary to big EPR. Number one, to get some flexibility regarding the equilibrium between the production and the consumption of electricity, and it's a way to get flexibility to introduce more wind and more sun in the mix. And the second reason is to try to propose a large deployment of this pressurized SMR for those industrial company, manufacturing company, which are using heat or electricity. So this is some trial of localization of more nuclear plants all around the country. Concerning advanced modular reactor, what is interesting is that the French government decided that they will not be ported by the institution, by Areva, by EDF, by Orado, Framatome. They will be ported, they will be born by startups which are starting working on that. And this is for me very interesting, because this new way of working is pushing all the lines, and so will reopen some new horizons. So this is the French strategy. If you agree, I will take just to say one remark about the small modular reactors general way, to say that for me, in the word small modular reactors, the most important between these three words is the word modular. I think you didn't mention it. And you can easily understand that if one doesn't change the way of constructing the nuclear reactor, this SMR will produce an electricity at a higher cost than larger reactor, because the scale effect is unfavorable for SMR. So to become economically efficient, small modular reactors have to be built with a new process. That's the important. A process which drastically decreases the whole construction duration. And modularity is a key element to master this duration, which could target to be 2 or 3 years. I recall that, I said it at the beginning, the Flamanville EPR took about, I would say, 15 years. And so, you know, the idea is to decrease drastically the duration of the construction. And so that means that modularity should mean, of course, components which are standardized, very standardized, and a new approach of the reactor design that's make able to build this reactor in a few modules in a workshop and not on site. In my opinion, this is a key element for the SMR. So the investment has not to be made, I would say, in the design. There is nothing new compared to the other pressurized water reactor. The innovation has to be put in the manufacturing process. So this is very important. That's where I would like to invest personally.
Okay. I guess there is some, to create that whole supply chain and to make it a big business, with lots of SMRs everywhere, we need also some form of regulatory harmonization, all over the market on an international basis as well, right? It's is it something that you consider important, maybe Daniel or Jay, on the role of regulation there? I can't hear you, Daniel. You need to unmute your.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I can say a few words, and Jay will complete. I think that when I speak about standardization, that's the key element that you pointed, Eric. In fact, that means that the regulation, the safety regulation, should be approximately the same for all the countries. If you do not standardize, you can't win the SMR battle. And so I think it's important that all the safety authority make a common view about what are the safety tips. There is no reason not to do it. Of course, safety is, I would say, is a national sovereignty. But frankly speaking, there is no reason for which the safety should be different, for instance, in United Kingdom and in France. Safety is safety. And so I think this is, you are right, this is a key element to win this battle. Jay, perhaps you have a different opinion.
No, I agree with you 100%. The regulation component has to be very defined for these technologies to be able to get to the market, because I'm going to look at this commercially, right? So I need to de-risk this. I need to understand that when I get ready to build this, I know that I'm regulatory compliant, and I know that I can go and construct this. But as you mentioned, each country is its own national safety authority. So dealing with those nuances globally is something from a technology development perspective you have to build into what you're doing. And the long-term goal to reach harmonization, it's a it's an activity that governments have been pursuing for some time, and even in fusion space now. There's a group called the Agile Nations Group. It's 7 different countries, and they're looking at technology innovation, and their focus is on ensuring regulation doesn't encumber new technologies coming to the market. So I think they've actually looked at getting fusion technology and regulation in that space as something to look at. So, and I know different countries, the US, UK, others are looking at, in Canada, are looking at how to collaborate on that front. So it's a key component, Eric, and worth watching.
All right, so it brings us to the topic you just mentioned, nuclear fusion, the holy grail of electricity production. And indeed, it's not too difficult to understand why people are calling it that. First of all, it promises to deliver a clean, virtually infinite source of energy capable of sustaining entire countries with abundant power. Fusing atoms together releases 4 million times more energy than burning coal and 4 times as much as nuclear fission at comparable mass. It is also relying on virtually inexhaustible fuel. Deuterium is one, can be found in seawater, and tritium can be derived from lithium, which is, as you know, another readily available element on Earth. Then fusion is considered super clean, doesn't release any CO2, no large quantities of radiotoxic waste is produced, the most problematic substance being tritium, which has, I believe, a 12.5 years half-life, which is much shorter than the sort of actinides that are found in the spent fuels of conventional reactors, for instance. And finally, in terms of safety, well, there is no risk of catastrophic chain reaction or reactor meltdown situation without controlled atmospheric pollution. In case of an accident, the reaction simply stops by itself. And one of the main difficulties so far for the scientist community has been to generate more fusion energy than is actually necessary to initiate the reaction. And we will come back to the technology in a moment, but what is truly fascinating to me in the case of nuclear fusion is the emergence of a vibrant ecosystem of private startups in parallel to large international fusion programs such as ITER, for instance. And these companies are typically funded by the likes of Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Sam Altman, or energy companies such as Chevron, Eni, Shell, Cenovus, Equinor, and all of them want concrete, workable fusion energy solutions before the end of this decade. In the past 3 years, nearly $5 billion has been pumped into that ecosystem to help it push the boundaries of our knowledge with the latest AI, machine learning, and supercomputing tools. So, General Fusion is one of the super innovative companies leading the revolution in the field. Can you please tell us a bit more about the company and its roadmap for commercial fusion before the end of this decade? And I think you wanted to share some slides. Maybe I'll stop sharing mine.
Yep. Yeah, I'll just share a couple of slides here. Did that work, Eric?
Yeah, it's fine. I can see you.
Great. Let me go to. So just a little bit about the company. We're definitely in that mix of leading companies. General Fusion has been around for about 20 years, Eric. We're headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia. We're over 200 employees now, 150 plus patents and patent pending. And as you mentioned, I think with our last financing round that closed late in 2021, we began to step into kind of the large global investor base with investors like Temasek, who led the round, stepping into our portfolio of investors. But as we move forward, and I'll kind of talk quickly here, that there's a half a dozen kind of leading companies in this sector, and in general, we're all on the same development timeline. And that is in the middle of this decade, in the mid-2020s, we'll be demonstrating our technology. So demonstrating the proof of concept of our approach to developing fusion energy. And then early in the next decade, early 2030s, are our targets for our first power plants to come to the market. So we're taking an approach that is focused on building on our last couple of decades of work, which has been really developing the core systems of our technology. We're developing a technology called magnetized target fusion. In this approach, we've been developing our systems, and what we're doing today is about to start construction on our fusion demonstration program in the United Kingdom at Culham on the UK AEA site there, and the focus there is to demonstrate at a power plant relevant scale that our technology does deliver the results that we need to be able to take that to the next level, which is going to be our commercial power plant. So that program, as I mentioned, we'll start construction on that soon and begin to move that forward and get into full-blown operations in the middle of the decade to demonstrate. And then we're also going to be able to retrieve from that some delivery insights into, what does it cost to build one of these machines? What are the economics of operations? And then thirdly, we're not just focused on the development of the technology, we're also focused on the market itself. And I'll talk about that briefly here before I wrap up. The other, well, just right quick, our technology, it's called magnetized target fusion. And quickly, this is a machine where there's a large fusion vessel. Inside that vessel is liquid lead lithium. And on the outside array there, you see a series of their drivers or pistons, and on top is a plasma injector. What we do is we have a rotor inside that vessel that spins that liquid metal. And as that liquid metal spins, it moves out to the edge of the vessel. And then those pistons begin to collapse this spinning vortex of liquid metal. And then as these pistons complete their stroke, we inject, if you imagine a smoke ring of deuterium, tritium plasma in there, those pistons complete their stroke, and it's an adiabatic process where we create basically the conditions at the center of the sun in 100 million degrees C, and fusion occurs. And our technology repeats that process to create fusion energy. The really unique thing about this particular approach is its ability to take this liquid metal then and run it through a heat exchanger and then boil water on the other side of that and have a conventional power plant there. So this particular approach kind of addresses some of the longer standing barriers to fusion, and that is protecting the machine itself with this layer of liquid metal, the ability to actually create electricity from fusion energy, again supported with this approach to liquid metal. The economics of this, we're magnetized target fusion. We have the basic construct of this technology is focused on protecting the machine with this liquid metal, so we don't have the first wall problems that you see with magnetic confinement approach. It's compressive, and we're using pistons. We're not using lasers. So again, leading to an economic product coming out of this in the long run. And as you mentioned in your earlier slide, our fuel is deuterium and tritium. We add a little bit of lithium to this liquid metal such that when we have the fusion reaction occur, we actually produce more tritium than we consume, and we put that back into our fuel cycle. So that's just a little bit of basics on our technology. And this is progressing. This is not all on paper. This is an 80-ton ingot. This is one of the first rings for our fusion vessel for our machine that's being built over in the UK. And then lastly, I wrap up with a couple of other things, just being conscious of time here. The regulatory construct for fusion is also something that's very important as we look to commercialize our technology in the longer run. I think we're seeing countries really beginning to evaluate this technology. I think the UK is really leading the charge on this. They've started several years ago to evaluate how to get fusion technology into the market. And so they came up a couple of years ago with a construct and adopted last year, and uniquely, the health and safety executive will be the regulator for fusion, and their nuclear regulator will not be kind of the day-to-day operational regulator for fusion. They'll be there from a non-proliferation perspective, but it's interesting that they took this particular approach. And I know the United States and Canada as well are very focused on this. So this is beginning to become clearer, and again, from a commercial perspective, helping to de-risk the going forward technology deployment. And then lastly, I think General Fusion is a very commercially focused company as well. So we're engaged with these 9 companies around the world to help us design the technology to give each of these a product that they can use in the long run. So we're beginning to get insights into operational needs and then specifics in the jurisdictions where all of these, I think recognized companies sit around the world to help us look at how that technology can be deployed there, and at the same time allowing these companies to get insights into the development of our technology as we begin to take it to market. So quickly, that's just a little snapshot on General Fusion, Eric.
Well, thanks very much for that update. And before we conclude, I wanted to ask actually maybe Daniel. Daniel, you've been the French rep at the ITER tokamak project, which is a completely different approach to the approach that has been described here by Jay. It's a massive, international collaboration involving 35 countries with a budget of probably more than $60 billion in total, according to some of our US partners, when the tokamak goes live in 2035, I believe. And I was wondering how you, as the former head of the COR, how you actually see this intrusion, if I may say, of the startup economy within, the whole fusion world. Do you see that as a game changer? Is it going to accelerate things going forward?
Okay, so as you mentioned there are before the proposal from General Fusion, there were 2 classical ways to try to get fusion. The first is by tokamak. I will say a few words about ITER. ITER is the greater tokamak which is being built for the moment all around the world. The second way, I think we have to recall it, is the inertial confinement fusion, which can be obtained, but by laser. You have to remember the hit of Lawrence Livermore laboratory last year, who announced that he was able to produce fusion in a target, and that this the energy which was produced by this fusion was greater than the laser energy. So that was the first part. But to be very honest, laser will remain, for me, a way to make physics, fusion physics, to understand the physics. It's a laboratory platform. It will never be a way to produce energy. It's just too far to what we can do, or perhaps in 3 or 4 centuries. The only way today is, as you mentioned, with tokamak, which are confining the plasma with electromagnetic fields. So you mentioned the size of the ITER project. You are right. This ITER project is gathering more than 85% of the whole humanity all around the world, with, as you mentioned it, 7 partners and a very big budget. So it's very difficult to know what is the budget of ITER, because you have 2 components in this budget. The first one is the money that each partner is bringing to the global organization, which is called ITER organization. It's rather $20 billion. And the second part is the in-kind supplying by each partner. And my assessment, so this is very personal, is that probably it's make twice the price of ITER. So probably the global price for ITER will be between $40 and $50 billion, which is, I recall it, the price of 5 reactors EPR or AP1000. So you have to keep it in mind. And the path, the agenda for ITER is not so fast. That's what was mentioned by Jay. ITER is supposed to switch on the tokamak by 2025, and to get the first dry run involving only deuterium 2 or 3 years later, so probably 2028, 2029. And the first fusion run implementing deuterium and tritium is supposed to take place by 2032, 35, difficult to say. And so that means that it takes time. And I recall also, because it's a huge price, but the total power of this tokamak will be 600 megawatts as a fusion energy. And so if there are an electric power connected to ITER, the electric power would be 200 megawatts. So as you see, it's a small one and even expensive. And ITER, you have to recall it, is the half-scale tokamak facility, which means that the full scale will probably cost, not to say twice, but probably 1.5 the cost of ITER and probably the same ratio for the site. So that's something very, very gigantic. Regarding this financing, for finance this gigantic facility, which are magnetic confinement fusion facility or fleets of UPR, you know, the problem is probably the financing, which is a true challenge for states of organization. Presumably, Jay mentioned it, private-public partnership will be necessary to finance this big facility. But that hypothesis assumes that these new plants will produce sufficiently cheap and abundant electricity to become sustainable. That's not proven today. And regarding this kind of partnership, the only experience that we have in France, so I can just speak about it, are concerning the financing of public office building, and the cost of them was almost 100 times lower than which will be necessary for ITER or for a big tokamak. So I think we have just questioned about the feasibility of this partnership. And I would say as a conclusion for that is that the states which are taking to produce electricity through fusion, as is shown, for instance, by ITER project, probably has to find a new way to develop this technology. I think ITER is probably too complex too, and it will be difficult to make it industrial. So I think, as you mentioned it, fusion seems very promising, but one must overpass the challenge and to be able to produce electricity. And I think the best way probably would be to find what I said, a smaller solution, as General Fusion is proposing, which of course are requesting smaller capex and of course very innovative solution that to be able to face the challenges. I think what is original in the General Fusion proposition is that it's a mix of the two, some kind of mix. So, sorry, Jay, I'm too fast, but some kind of mix between the two approach. It takes benefits of the two conventional approach, which is the inertial approach and the magnetic approach. I think it's a good idea. I think there is another country which is thinking to that. It's Russia. There are some people in Sarov, in Arzamas, in 1975 who proposed the Makot concept, which was not so far what we are proposing, which is a smaller concept, which is the intermediate between these two big paths, which will probably not be industrialized. Thank you very much.
Right, it's time. Jay, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I'll just add to that by saying, and maybe just kind of on the public-private partnership platform, that fusion is making new inroads from a government perspective. I think if you look this week, the UK actually announced a new focused organization in government to actually deliver fusion technology in the country. In the United States, there is a new cost share program that was kicked off at the White House last year to deliver a fusion power plant design by the end of this particular decade. And so that particular program has been appropriated funding in the $500 million range, and it is going to begin to kick off this year as we go forward. So I think as governments look to progress this new technology, fusion is beginning to make its inroads into kind of going forward energy policy discussions. It has to kind of move out of the science part of government and into the delivery and energy part of governments to make this a little bit more real. And then lastly, maybe as an example, in the United States, an example of how public-private partnerships work, and I think it's a good parallel for the fusion sector, is to look at SpaceX, right? So you take startups and they tie themselves to a big government agency like NASA, and it's just, like when we look at ETAP, we see a solid foundation of science that benefits the whole world with the advancements that are made there. But you have a program that delivers in the way that a government delivers a program. We're delivering our technology, I'll say, at the speed of investments, speed of business. We've got investors that want to see returns, so we're able to do some things differently and at different rates that just aren't possible in these other constructs. So, as these public-private partnerships come into play, I think that will be key too as we go forward and see the commercialization of fusion energy in the near term. Thanks, Eric.
All right, well, it's time to conclude. Unfortunately, this session, we're already a bit out of time, so I'm going to be quick. I would argue at this point that if nuclear power is increasingly accepted as a legitimate source of energy in the context of national energy transition programs, there still needs to be a deeper debate about the exact nature of the next generation of reactors, and technology choices that we make today will frame the future of the industry and will determine its competitiveness for the next 100 years or so. I am also in no doubt that given the sums involved, this debate will demand a lot of courage from the various stakeholders and from policymakers. Then I would argue that success in bringing a more sustainable generation of nuclear technologies requires robust support from the financial community at large. The public purse alone probably not big enough, anymore to support all these big developments in the current post-COVID macroeconomic context. And of course, building the incentives for that community to join the negotiation table requires a higher degree of financial creativity and remains a complex and delicate endeavor. Solutions are starting to emerge, and it is my view that it is the role of financial institutions like ours to actually make sure that they become a success going forward. We will actually address this specific topic in an upcoming research paper with my esteemed colleague Ivan Pavlovich later this year. Meanwhile, my colleague Gary Young from Hong Kong will update us on the growing role of China as a nuclear energy superpower. And if you would like to dig a bit deeper into the tech elements that were discussed today, then I invite you to download our research mini-series called The Future is Nuclear, The Future is Unclear, which is available right now on the Natixis research website. I want to thank our two guests today for their time, for their thought-provoking contribution to this round table. And it was really great to have you both share your thoughts on what is essentially a very complex and very, very wide topic. Thank you very much. And on that, I will switch back to Patrick in the studio for maybe one or two questions if we have time.
Yes, thanks a lot, Eric, Daniel, and Jay. We have received a few questions for the sake of time. I will probably pick one, which is how close are we to seeing financing for fusion? So obviously, General Fusion is a well-funded startup, but how do we see an influx of actually financing, maybe coming to the industry as it scales up?
I think as the sector itself moves forward with their demonstration activities as we go through the course of just the next few years, that's where the demonstration of the technologies will actually come to fruition. And I think, with that will be an accelerator to bring, additional investment into the sector. And in parallel, I guess, with that in the near term, all of these companies as well are designing their next evolution of their technology as well. So I think the real, the demonstration machines will be key in catalyzing that. And then as that goes forward, it becomes a power project at that point, and then it's going to rely on the economics of the electricity price coming out of these new technologies that'll be the real foundation for investment into the sector.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jay. Thanks to everyone for attending this conference, this Explore Tech Forum, which will become a monthly meeting. So the next one will be in February, later in the month, on sports and new technology. And thanks again for having attended this conference. Thank you, Eric, Daniel, and Jay.
Thank you.